Ladies and gentlemen, welcome here to my weekly talk show, Compass, live from St. Gallen, Switzerland. I'm very pleased to welcome today Mr. Professor Fabrice Jotterand from the Medical College of Wisconsin. Fabrice, welcome back to Switzerland. I know you're of Swiss origin. It's such a pleasure to have you here in my today's talk show.
Well, thank you for welcoming me, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about this very important topic that we're going to discuss. So it's always good to connect with the homeland, Switzerland.
Pleased to hear that, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Jotterand is a professor of bioethics and medical humanities. You're also the director of the graduate program in bioethics at the Medical College in Wisconsin. And I already had an interview 2 years ago with Mr. Professor Jotterand about neurorights, which was a very inspiring and also interesting discussion. And today we will talk about neuroprosthetics. And I came across a very interesting paper which you wrote a couple of years ago related to neuroprosthetics. And I'd like him to tell us how you started actually with your research on the use of neuroprosthetics and what does it mean?
Well, thank you for the introduction. So the reason why I started thinking about the application of neurotechnologies in the clinical context is because I realized there was a narrative that is based on a more kind of transhumanist vision of the use of technology, that is the idea of enhancing human capacities, cognitive capacities, or physical capacities, or even in terms of addressing the question of manipulating or controlling behavior. I just published a book on the question of moral bioenhancement, and it's a critique of the use of neurotechnologies, broadly conceived. It could be drugs or devices to control human behavior. If you're interested in the topic,
absolutely.
The title of the book is The Unfit Brain and the Limits of Moral Bioenhancement, published in 2022, last year, by Palgrave. But then I realized that, we are developing these technologies and there might be clinical applications. And one of them, I had a second appointment at the University of Basel in Switzerland, and we had a project on dementia. And so we look at the question of what about if we use these technologies to address the question of dementia care, that is to help individuals either to address the issue, can we let's say treat dementia, or can we help individuals suffering from dementia? And so then in looking at the statistics, the prediction, we're going to have a lot of issues related to dementia care. A lot of people will be affected by dementia, different type of dementia. So I thought, well, let's explore ways to address that question, because some drugs are not sufficient to address the issue. So maybe neurotechnology will allow us to address it.
So at least a way, if there's no medicine to solve and treat dementia, at least to cope with it. Am I right? To use technical devices to make life of people affected by dementia more comfortable.
Yes, and so, the drugs, at least in the United States, the FDA approved prescription drugs to manage the symptoms. But these drugs at this point will not treat dementia. And so the idea is to use these drugs, but then we could supplement the care of these patients by using different type of technologies, such as companion robots for patients suffering from Alzheimer's disease. The idea is to have these robots helping them to have a comfortable life, reminding them to do certain things or to monitor what they do. And there are other technologies using AI and machine learning to predict Alzheimer's disease or dementia, and then the idea is to communicate that to the patient, so the patient will be able to make some lifestyle changes, etc., etc. And then, of course, we have neuroprosthetics, but I think we're going to go a little bit further. We're going to address this question a little bit further down our interview.
Well, I interviewed a couple of months ago Professor Amos Korchin, a very famous Israeli neurologist, on the rising cases of dementia worldwide. The World Health Organization has published already in January 2022 an article in which they sent almost an alarming signal to the world that the cases of dementia are rising. And Professor Korchin said, well, the best thing to do is to take your sleep and take your rest during your life, and that you shouldn't have a very stressful life. But I guess things are more complicated than having a good sleep, isn't it?
Well, yes, of course. And what's very interesting, I just found out that Pfizer, for instance, the pharmaceutical company, they're not trying to develop drugs to treat Alzheimer's disease or different types of dementia. But they tried because it's too costly. And if you look at the outcomes, well, we haven't found the cure. So now what they're trying to do is to find maybe other causes. And I read recently an article that they're looking at diabetes as a potential cause for dementia. So, of course, it's more complicated than just, diet, sleep, etc., etc. But I think we can do certain things to prevent the development of Alzheimer's disease. And if you look at what we eat, the lack of exercise, the stress we have, especially in Western culture, we need to think carefully about our lifestyle and how this is affecting our brain. So so yes, it's very complex, and there might be a genetic basis that we need to account for. So it's a very complex condition, and but as you pointed out, there's an alarming increase number of cases, and so we need to address it. And it's yeah. So I'm going to stop here.
No, you're welcome to continue. The paper which I referred to at the beginning of our discussion, which motivated and inspired me to invite you again in my talk show, it's called Intelligent Assistive Technologies for Dementia, Clinical, Ethical, Social and Regulatory Implications. And I also saw that Marcelo Jensa from Zurich is one of the co-authors. I enjoyed another interview with him a lot. So I see that the very smart scientists come together to address such a serious issue. But your paper goes back to 2019, and now it's 2023, and I think in December, The Lancet had published an article referring to dementia cases of people suffering of long COVID. Would that Alzheimer's disease and rising cases of dementia also include possible long COVID cases, since they may also give rise to dementia?
I have actually, this is something that I didn't know about, the connection between COVID and Alzheimer's disease. So I would need to read the article and see how there is such connection. So I cannot really answer, but I wouldn't be surprised because we know that COVID affects the nervous system, and therefore there could be a connection. But I cannot answer that question because
it's more a medical question.
Yeah,
can't answer it either.
Yeah.
But what exactly could technical devices do except robots? How would, for instance, neuroprosthetics look like? Is it more software? Is it a machine? Is it just merely a robot? How does such a technique look like?
So when I looked at neuroprosthetics, and I was wondering, well, as we know, the hippocampus is key to human memory, right? To memory, how we process information and how information is stored in the brain. So Alzheimer's disease really affects the hippocampus, but also other parts of the brain. But I was doing a review, and then I realized, well, people are developing an artificial hippocampus. And so what does that mean? So basically what you're trying to do is to implant a device that will be connected to other parts of the brain that will allow an individual to hypothetically to regain the ability to remember information. So what we need to keep in mind is that Alzheimer's disease affects short-term memory. People with Alzheimer's disease will be able to recall events that happened 20, 30 years ago. But if you ask them, what did you eat yesterday, they might be in trouble. So the idea is really to replace the hippocampus and then allow, it's like a chip, right? And allow this individual to quote unquote function normally. So in terms of how the technology works and how it is, I think it's too complex, and I'm sure for our audience it wouldn't be very relevant. But what we need to know is really you implant a chip. It's an artificial hippocampus in the brain, and the idea is to replace the hippocampus.
Are already such chips available, and how complicated would be such a surgery?
So are they available? I don't know if it has been approved in the United States by the FDA. This would be a question that I would have to investigate a little bit more, but I wouldn't be surprised if people are moving in that direction. I think the article that I was referring to was an article in 2017 where people were developing that device. What's very interesting to me, what we need to know is that usually the public is not really up to date. Even people like me who's doing research on these topics, it's very difficult to be up to date on the technology because, as you can imagine, you might have the military developing technologies that they don't want people to know about. So I've been told that usually we are always kind of behind up to 10 years in terms of the type of technologies that we know about. So what we need to, we would have to ask to specialists developing this technology, see where the technology is there. But I wouldn't be surprised if we are already implanting these type of chips. And then the question, but as I'm pretty sure we're going to discuss, there are issues related to just implanting a chip in the brain, especially when it relates to memory, because it raises question about personal identity, sense of self, and how we build a self in relation to others, all these kind of philosophical questions that we need to address. So from I would say, technical standpoint, it might be feasible. From a clinical standpoint, it might be useful. But then we have the ethical and philosophical questions that we need to address carefully and make sure that we are helping these patients. And here, of course, there is always the difference between the clinical setting and then outside, I would say, the kind of broader social context. In the clinical setting, we're dealing with patients. If people want to do an implant a chip to increase memory just because they're interested in enhancing their capacities and say, hey, I'm willing to implant an artificial hippocampus so I can retain more information, etc. I think this is a little bit a different discussion than in the clinical context. That being said, the two situations, the two scenarios affect our humanity. And I think this is where we need to think about how we relate to technology, how technology affects us, and to what extent, what are the boundaries of allowing technology to be part of us, to become part of who we are as individuals. And so going back to the book I mentioned earlier, in my last chapter, I'm asking that specific question. What is our relationship to technology? How should technology affect us? And I made that claim many times. It seems to me that suddenly technology is defining us, as opposed to us using technology for the betterment of our own condition as an individual, but also society.
I think you mentioned military research, for instance, and you also said that there might be a sort of delay between the scientific development, what might be already available from a scientific point of view, and what proliferates, let's say, to a department like yours dealing with biomedical ethics. I think there shouldn't be such a delay, because dealing with such technology, it's only scientists like you able to answer on that question. So I think it's very important to have such debates, and I would suggest that scientists like you should be as much briefed on the technological level as, let's say, scientists working for a military department, because the acceptance of the use of such technology, the responsive way how a society or individuals might deal with such technology, it's all philosophy and ethics. And as long as you don't have scientists from this area of research dealing with these aspects, such technologies, I doubt that they will be accepted without any reserves by the majority of the people. And also, if one, let's say, is scared of technology, then it's rather a problem of lacking information than of accepting something new. So I think it was Churchill who said that if there's a problem with democracy, one can treat it with even more democracy. So the prejudice referring to, let's say, transhumanism, the prejudice referring to technical development is due to lacking information and making such technology attractive, and also pointing out the finger at possible risks. Not talking about this neither a solution, and nor would it be a solution to wait and have the scientific development, let's say, of the military to tell us what might be available on the market.
Well, so yes, you're raising an important point. I think the problem, and especially in the United States, in the European context, because of the past history, people are a little bit more reluctant to embrace technology. And there is also a question of means, for research, et cetera, et cetera. But the problem is technology has become a worldview, or technoscience. And so this is the problem, because if you live in that environment and if you see the world only through technoscience, of course, every problem will be addressed through technology. We think, and this is what I'm trying to address in the book I mentioned. Suddenly we have issues about more progress in our society. And the move is to say, oh, let's use technology. We cannot have people behave through traditional means of moral education. We're going to use technology. And so this is this reflex of always moving to technology, I think in some ways undermines our ability as human beings to reflect, to engage, to critique, and then maybe as a society to say, okay, you want to develop these technologies, you want to protect us, but have you thought about, the impact that technology has on us? If you think about, AI or, the type of monitoring that we have in our society, I think it's detrimental to trust in the government, to civil society, to how we relate to each other, et cetera, et cetera. So everything is mediated through technology, and it becomes this kind of technocracy that in some ways, at least I tend to be critical, because I want to emphasize the human component. Technology should always serve human ends, and we should not be slaves of technology. And so this is where I would draw the boundaries related to these type of questions.
Well, if one was to put himself in the situation of a patient suffering of at least being susceptible to dementia or Alzheimer's disease, he would actually make everything possible to fulfill his dream and maybe have such a technical device in order to be healthy. A friend of mine, Lucy Stammer, a former member of parliament, he called me on the 31st of December to wish me all the best for the new year, and he quoted his father, who was a famous professor for medicine, and he said, "Radu, you know what my father always used to say, that in generally speaking, people have all sorts of wishes. The sick one has only one wish." So take now a sick person, an ill person, who will only have one wish, to be healthy. And if that would be by a technical device, how could you explain to such a person that even in his situation there are boundaries which he should not go across? He should not go across the Rubicon and have, let's say, his personality altered by technical devices, and that the price to pay for such technologies for the entire society might be a very high one.
But it's a hard question. But I think the burden should not be on the patient. The burden should be on the clinician. Of course, the patient will have a discussion with the family and might say, well, you're my proxy. I'll allow you to do whatever it takes for me to feel better, because let's say the patient has Alzheimer's disease, and as you know, these individuals, sometimes they say, myself is disintegrating, I'm no longer me, and you have all these type of questions, right? So you're going to have a proxy. But then as a clinician, I think we have to be, I'm not a clinician, but a clinician should be very careful and treat the patient with respect. Respect of the identity of the patient, to be truthful of the implication of using these technologies, and the best interest principle should apply to that context. So what is in the best interest of the patient, right? And so all I would say these three pillars should guide the clinical discussion. Respect of identity, you're not there to change the identity of the patient. You're there to bring back as much as possible the identity of the patient. When we talk about Alzheimer's disease, you want to bring back the patient to a baseline where the patient feels good, but you need to be truthful. In terms of technology, the implications, the potential negative consequences of using these technologies, and not saying yes, everything will be fine, because long term we don't know what it would mean to have a chip implanted in the brain, and in terms of identity and in terms of how somebody will function. Because then the question is, let's say, and again, this is hypothetical, but let's say you change the hippocampus, and so let's assume that the memories are gone. How are you going to rebuild a sense of self for that individual? That individual is 65. There is a past, memories, etc.
Talking about the psychological continuity of a person, of a potential patient, is that right?
Yes. And how to rebuild that? So in terms of being truthful, what about if that person has a criminal record, has done bad things in the past? Are you going to just say, oh, that person is suffering from these memories? We're not going to just, talk about these memories, but how we develop as individuals, how we become better people, is by looking back at the past and say, I've done these mistakes, and I grew. I became a better person. I learned from the past. All of that has to be accounted for in how we relate to the patient. And of course, the best interest principle is to say, is it in the best interest of that particular individual? I know, for instance, there are some technologies, deep brain stimulation, to treat depression. And you see, I have a specific case in mind that was in an article, but basically the mother was depressive. She was on with the stimulation of the brain. She felt better, but she had a different personality. And so the children went to their dad and say, this is not mom. I don't recognize my mom. And then she was off. She was depressed, and the children say, oh, this is mom again. And so
which interrupted the therapy.
Yes, because basically it was a device off and on. Stimulation, not stimulation. And so the question is it in the best interest of the family to have a different mom, and I mean for the kids, to have a different mom? So we have to see what is the impact of having this technology. Of course, that individual say, oh, I feel good. So then you have to discuss with the children, the husband, the broader family, etc., etc. These are complex issues, and decide what is in the best interest of the patient, but also if you in the context of family. And as you know, we deliver care. It's not just about the patient, but it's also how this affects the whole structure of the family. So go ahead.
There are several opportunities. I think while listening to you, it reminds me of an interview which I had with Professor Haselager from Rotterdam, related to several opportunities of neuromodulation. I mean, you have actually people who would like to get rid of a certain experience, and then you also have maybe criminals which have to have, let's say, a part of their memory maybe against their will rewritten in order to prevent them committing again severe crimes. So there are several opportunities. So where you draw a line, that seems to me very, very interesting, between those who maybe need to have a corrective measure, who would be entitled to authorize such a therapy, and those who would love to get rid of some memories in order to have a benefit, a psychological benefit in their life at a later stage.
Well, as far as I know, and I might be mistaken, I don't think we can rewrite memories. My understanding is that it's the emotional dimension that is diminished. So you might recall I did X, but the kind of affective dimension is not affecting that individual. And this is what we try to do. But to rewrite memories, as far as I know, it's not possible. And unless you there is technology, and I haven't followed that discussion. And so I would be careful with this type of intervention. But the problem is, we as society, we can hijack this technology and say, hey, it's all about me. This is what I want to do. And so now in the clinical context, it might be a little bit different, because you want to treat that individual. You want an individual to get better. In the criminal setting, in the prison setting, or in criminal law, you can imagine scenarios where people go through these treatments, but again, we can manipulate individuals, but I don't think we can fundamentally change them.
Yeah.
Yes. And so again, it goes back to our humanity. And because it's one thing to say, okay, you're a psychopath. And again, my book on moral bioenhancement is really to look at this question about, could we use these technologies to control, to manipulate, or change the behavior of criminal psychopath? And But I'm a little bit concerned because if we go that path, then you could say, well, what about people who are deviant? They're not necessarily criminal. What about if you have individuals in power not liking a certain group of people, using these technologies, et cetera, et cetera? So we have to be very careful where we draw the boundaries. And as we know, we are not very good in the history of psychiatry. We are not very good in setting clear boundaries about where we want to go as a society and how do we want to use technology, why should we control the behavior of individuals, et cetera, et cetera. And even in a free society like United States, for instance, if you think about Facebook, they use psychologists to develop these technologies, or Google, TikTok, so it becomes addictive. It becomes a way of getting your attention, but it's based on manipulation, using technology, and now using AI and algorithm, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah.
In the case of an artificial hippocampus, you spoke about the issue of the personal continuity. Now, if that personal continuity, which deals with the biography of the person, with his experience, with his emotions, is done away with because of his disease, how would be his decision-making process then work? I mean, our decision-making process is also based on our experiences, on things which we learned. Is then the decision-making process something given out of our hands to a computer? Will then a machine take the decisions?
Yes, but I think the hippocampus is one part of the brain that is involved in decision-making processes. As you know, even at the later stage of Alzheimer's disease, a person can make decisions, and the hippocampus is affected. So I wouldn't say that you start from scratch and then you delete totally what happened in the past. But if we talk about psychological continuity, the problem is what part of that biography play a role in defining the future. And this is very difficult. In my view, if we have a patient with Alzheimer's disease, hypothetically we implant a chip. What is important for the surrounding individual supporting the patient suffering from Alzheimer's disease is to rebuild that identity as much as possible. So I think it's, our identity is not just based on a self trying to figure out how to navigate the world. It's always in relation to others, right? And so this is why we have to make sure that these individuals are fully supported. Now, it could be in the case of using companionship robots, but these robots might not be able to, in some ways, recall the past and relate in a way that two human beings can. So I think I would say yes, but we need to rebuild these memories in ways that respect the identity of the patient.
Well, living in a world, particularly in the Western world, in which the individuality, the autonomy of a personality is considered to be detrimental to the common benefit. And there is a term, particularly in German, Gemeinwohlorientierung. I don't know if you ever came across of this. Gemeinwohl means the common good orientation. So I would say that this German term of Gemeinwohlorientierung is a sort of Chinese social credit system in the European culture. And I personally, I'm rather afraid that such technology might lead us to a society of a Gemeinwohlorientierung, but not one according to a decision-making process of individuals or of a society which agrees upon such rules, but rather sort of artificial implementation of certain standards in order to attain such a, I have to repeat this horrible term again, Gemeinwohlorientierung society. Do you see this danger, or do you think it's negligible?
So this is the nature of technology. Technology does not allow individuality. It tends to bring everybody at the same level. It's, you know, even if you think about behavior, it doesn't account for the diversity of human experience. Everybody has a different biography, and this is what makes us unique. And so it is a danger. In my work, I I made that point very clear. It's very important to understand that if technology defines us, if technology controls us, then the risk is to come to this idea that we are becoming all identical in the way we think, in the way we behave, in the way we look like. Because, I mean, if you create a bionic hand, we don't have the diversity. If we take two hands for any individual, they're all different. But we cannot have that diversity with technology. The same way in terms of human behavior. If we use technology to control behavior, in terms of values, it's going to be very limited. So I think it is a real risk, and this is why countries like China worries me. A country like China worries me, because they don't have the same kind of anthropological assumptions about protecting the individual, allow the individual to be free, as opposed to say, well, it's really about the people that is important, and we're going to achieve certain goals by sacrificing people using technology. And I think it's always a risk.
Given you would meet a person who would have such an artificial hippocampus implanted in his brain, do you think you might recognize that if he wasn't to tell you that straight? Look, Mr. Professor, I have such an implant. Do you think you might recognize that while talking to him?
That a person has a
artificial hippocampus, yeah.
Well, if you don't know the person, no. I mean, in principle, no. I think the maybe members of the family say, well, you change a little bit here. You used to think this way, now you think this way. And this is based on the person developing new knowledge. But again, this is hypothetical.
Hypothetical, yeah.
Yes.
Do you think a normal human being might, so if interrupting you, feel somehow inferior? Given I would meet someone with an artificial hippocampus, I might tend to feel somehow inferior because I could not cope with him. I mean, he would be definitely more competent and performant in several areas in comparison to me.
And this is another ethical issue that we need to think about, because again, who's going to have access to these technologies, right? It's going to be the rich and famous. And we see already with other domains who has access to electric cars, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So now this is always the danger, that we're going to create a kind of two-tier humanity, even beyond that. Because you might have, if you think about cognitive capacities, we have to think also about physical capacities. What about if you have an individual with stronger cognitive capacities, stronger physical capacities, in terms of behavior too, ability to manipulate, then this is we're opening the door to the post-human future, right? Where we're going to have a different type of humanity, and we're going in that direction. This individual potentially could rule the world, and then we have what I would call the Amish of humanity. People say, no, I don't want that technology. It goes against my values, it dehumanizes us, et cetera, et cetera. And this is where we need to think clearly about what is the future of the human species.
So I think that there is a risk a plausible risk of a sort of technological apartheid between those with an augmentation and those who sort of Amish who would refuse such enhancement?
Yeah, absolutely. So those who are just, embracing the technological imperative and say, this is the future of humanity, this is what we need to do. And then those individuals saying, we're not interested in engaging with technology. But I think we already see red flags about how technology is impacting us just by looking at the data about social media in terms of how this affects the younger generation and how the younger generation are just embracing technology. They're addicted to technology. It has impacts on their mood, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a critique of technology to do in ways that we have to be smart about the critique. We don't want to say no to technology, but then we don't want to embrace it blindly. And so we need to find the right, I would say, the right balance. And in my view, again, I'm repeating myself, if technology undermines our humanity, this is where I would say I would draw the boundaries.
Unfortunately, the can of worms has been opened already, and we can't, once it's open, and it's open forever. So maybe the next step would be really with scientists like you to emancipate the people and to draw and to point on the finger at the risks, and to have people behaving responsible with such technologies, asking questions, dealing in a prudent manner with whatever the technological spectrum may offer. I want to give you an example. I have a almost 12 years old daughter, and already 2 years ago, I had few discussions with her because I oppose the extensive use of the iPad and the iPhone. Right? She used it every day, but I wasn't that amused about it. So whatever I told her, she somehow refused my arguments. And then I had the idea, what about for the 1st of June, which is in Romania, the International Day, we celebrate in Romania the International Day of the Children, what if I would moderate with her an interview with Professor Manfred Spitzer? He's a very famous German neurologist who wrote a book about dementia, about the technical dementia, which may appear due to the extensive use of technical devices. And that was an extremely educative and instructive interview with her, because whatever she asked, he told her right what are the consequences for someone who is below 18 or even 19, until the brain is and the eyes are not fully developed. What are the risks of this permanent use of technical devices for the memory, for the eyes, in general for the fitness of a body? And that changed her behavior a lot. That 1 hour discussion was more important and helped more than all the other fights which we had before.
And I think this is what we need to do, is to reach the younger generation, because I see with my kids too, to be on the phone all the time, it's part of their world. But if you talk to scientists and you try to set boundaries, it's not in academia, and it's part of the human condition to explore, to push boundaries, to develop new devices, etc., etc. So I think what we need to, in some ways, to let the market decide.
Okay. Yeah.
And allow us to say, no, we don't want this. And if people say, no, we're not going to buy these products because we know how it affects us, then people will pay attention. But I think in terms of addressing the question with scientists, yes, we need to be part of this conversation. We need to be proactive, but it's very difficult to go to a scientist, to an engineer, and say, hey, have you thought about this? And say, well, but I have a grant, and this is what I'm doing, and I want to know more. I want to develop. This is my career. I want to be famous, etc. All these questions we have to. It's tougher. What you did with your daughter, I think it might be the way to go.
the digital dementia, that's Professor Spitzer's book, which I highly recommend to the audience, to parents, and also to young children. I think this prudence in future is a big step towards the right direction.
It is. But we have many challenges. I don't see technology being underused, but we're moving in directions that in some ways we might affect our humanity in ways that we don't know yet. And if you think about genetics, if you think about brain-computer interfaces, I just put together an edited. It's called the Routledge Handbook of the Ethics of Human Enhancement with Marcello Janka that you mentioned previously, and we have 30 chapters, and we're asking these questions about what are the boundaries of enhancing ourselves using technology. Based on the chapters, some are pro, some are con, but I think we are on the technological wagon in ways that will be very difficult it's going to be difficult to stop it. But we have to be responsible and smart and make sure that we are not just destroying ourselves as a species.
You're absolutely right. I couldn't agree more. My intention is to bring to the audience as many examples as possible of technical evolution and technical possibilities in order to have an emancipated audience and to walk and to balance for themselves, to give themselves a thought, do we really wish it? And if so, at which extent? And if we don't, then actually to pull the wagon into the drift and simply refuse it. But before that, people need to know what is actually available, or at least theoretically, what might be available in order to help them in their decision-making process.
Yes, so here you have to approach it. It's a top-down or bottom-up. And I think what you're proposing, and I totally agree, it's a bottom-up approach to say, these are the gadgets, these are the implications, these are the risks, these are the benefits. But the audience has to be educated, and just to forbid things might not be the way to go, because people will be curious, and we might say no in Europe and the United States, but in other parts of the world they say, hey, we're going to do it. And I think there is what I would say a biopolitical dimension. As we know, technology, look at what's going on with AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning. When people have access to that technology, they will rule the world. If we have super soldiers, we have abilities to manipulate and control the world through AI and machine learning, these people will be on top of the world. And so this is what you see, what's going on between China and the United States. I think Europe is more about, let's think, let's be critical, but in terms of technological innovation, China and the United States are really leading the pack, so to speak.
Fabrice, we approached, unfortunately, the end of our interview. Thank you very, very much for joining me. Wishing you once more a happy new year, and ladies and gentlemen, the same to you. Looking forward to seeing you again here next week on Campus. All the best. Greetings to Wisconsin, and see you soon.
Thank you for the opportunity, and it's always a pleasure to be part of the show. Thank you. Happy New Year to you and the audience.
Thank you very much, Fabrice. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.